For drawing the nose, the two basic shapes that I like to think about are the triangle and the circle. There are going to be a couple of series of them throughout the form of the nose. I like to start using the top of the nose and the area of the nostrils, actually. So here. And I like to think about this as one giant triangle, kind of like this. Here. This is one triangle shape. Another triangle shape that I like to think about is going to be kind of specifically in the nostril area. And it's going to be if we kind of drag this line, or this point rather, up here towards the middle of the nose, and drag that to the other side of the nostril. So here, we kind of have another type of triangle. What this looks like is now we're going to have a triangle. Maybe you can add a little line at the top. And a smaller triangle at the bottom. Oftentimes when we're drawing, I like to do, of course, the larger drawing itself, but a smaller structural drawing to the side so I can understand what these larger proportions look like before committing to smaller information. So I have one large triangle and the second large triangle. I'm going to go ahead and put this smaller triangle in shadow. This is going to talk about the plane change from this top of the nose to the bottom of the nose. The third and fourth types of triangles are going to be the major planes to the left and right side of the nose. So we see here, we have a triangle like this. That's going to amount to this one. And then we're going to do the other thing on the other side, same sort of triangle, using this line for the nostril as the base for said triangle. And so what this allows us to see now is the planes of the nose. And these become very subtle areas when we are eventually shading the nose. But first I also want to talk about afterwards I'll talk about the circle. Within the nose, you might think, okay, the circle could be the nostril itself. It has, depending on the person, various different types of shapes. You might see a nostril shape that'll look like this, or it might be a little bit more oval. The point might be a little higher. So I would watch out when, equating a circle to the nostril shape. Instead, there are two areas. One is going to be right here, actually. I kind of think about it like the ball of the nose. And what's interesting in this particular part of the nose, especially when we break it down as a ball or sphere, we can almost think of this exercise that we often do here of the tonal value or tonal scale in the form of a sphere. It kind of has this same function in a way. So we're going to see that here. That's going to be roughly in this spot. The second sphere or circular form is just a little bit above it, and it kind of depends on person to person. You'll have a bit of a form, let's say almost like an egg shape, if not a sphere, right up top. And you have to be careful and look at the shadows when you're depicting this particular area. We first started with a triangle, and then once we incorporate a little bit more of the shadows, we'll see that right here, there's just a little bit of a curve right in this spot. And of course, you see the major curve down here. So here and here are going to be our two circular or ovicular forms that make up the structures of the nose. Now, we'll just quickly go back to the triangle shape. Most of our triangles have been in this direction, but we can't forget triangles obviously can exist in this particular direction. What I like to use for this upside down triangle is actually the area in between the nostrils going down almost to our philtrum. This area becomes in a way like an upside down triangle. And when I look at these 2 points on the nostrils, this is kind of what allows me to begin to draw the nostril shape, or at least get into the beginning of the structure of the nostrils. So I'll have my upside down triangle here, a little line across. Sometimes this line will exist as a shadow shape, which we can see right here underneath the ball of the nose. Then once I have this upside down triangle here, then I can start to get into the specific shape of the nostril. And I'll start with this oval-ish shape here. And this particular end, once I start to connect back into the triangle, I will draw through the triangle and make sure I loop it around so I can connect it to the other nostril here. Keeping my lines as straight as possible so I can be very specific about every little plane change. And then I'm led back to that upside down triangle form. Depending on your lighting situation, I often like to recheck the shape of the nostrils by filling them in with a light value or flat value so I can look at the shape of the shadow. And this is when I can start to make small adjustments with my eraser. To make that shadow shape larger or smaller as I see fit or as needed. This sort of shape of the nostril, we can use the shape to our benefit because it is in a way mirrored slightly on this upper part of the nose. So we have this curve here, and I like to move upwards and find a similar curve. One thing to look out for, though, is the space between the nostril and the edge of the nose will change depending on where you are. So this is going to be a good chance to make sure that you are looking at the distance as you move all the way around. Similarly to here. Sometimes you might find that the space is too wide or too thin. So this is a good time to really check these distances as you mirror this form of the nose. Then as we move up from this curved spot, we're back at our triangle, this one here. This creates a very smooth and subtle plane. And we could do the same thing on the other side. So we are back at our triangle number 1, triangle number 2 on the left and right sides of the nose. This is where, again, we're going to have some really soft, subtle value changes. And I would say this is going to be one of the areas to really look out for when drawing the nose. It's going to be, of course, different on everyone. But this characteristic, or this is an important part of the nose that really creates the characteristic of the portrait. So what I often do, so let's say if the lighting's coming from this way, I have a really dark shadow line here. So now I will make sure that I make sure, this side is in shadow. As you move further up this triangle, again, we're going to encounter not one, but two round forms. One is going to be this ball of the nose, and the other one is going to be closer to the top of the nose. So you can start to make sure you vary your type of shadow. What this means is we probably won't have a shadow line that goes straight up. Instead, we'll have it curve around, up, and then curve around again. And this allows our nose to have a bit more character. The triangular forms on either side are going to be slightly curved. Here, I'll do a little bit one here, a smaller one here. You can always check, of course, smaller measurements or proportions by dragging the line all the way across, connecting them. As I rarely focus on one side and mirror on the other, I always like to think of it as one big shape. In one big shape. And of course, this goes back to our original triangle here and our larger triangle here. You might find when you're drawing the nose, the highlights or the brightest parts of the nose are going to be in this section and this section, because the form is coming out a little bit more. And the way I like to conceive of this or show this is through a center line. We like to think about a center line as a very simple line like this. However, I think it's also going to be great to think about how the line goes in and out of space. And I'll draw that with a bit more intention here. And we move towards the philtrum, going towards the lips. So I always like to draw or make sure I see this sort of curvilinear center line as I'm drawing the nose. This is going to allow me to understand actually how round it can be. And this round part that I'm drawing now is going to be the area in the middle of those two triangles. And so these are going to be some great tools for you to use as you draw the nose, particularly, of course, from the front or even in a bit of three-quarter view.